So on this particular piece, we have been trying to raise the issue of substandard generics, and one way forward was have been capacity building with the local national regulatory authorities to make sure countries then have themselves better tools. You know, on your distribution piece, I'm always stuck. So when I again look at our experience in malaria, we deliver 70 million treatments per year of high-quality anti-malaria medicine, and this is for free for the patient. And it works, let's say, reasonably well, not optimal. If you look at it, there are still stockouts. We now try to have an SMS system to make sure the health posts don't have stockouts. But there is very little responsibility in the whole distribution chain and delivery, we find. Now, you will for sure be acquainted with the AMFM, so the Access to Malaria Medicines program, where there's subsidized malaria medicine being distributed, where the distribution chain has a financial incentive. And the idea for this is to make sure that where the public health sector doesn't reach, the economic incentive for people to earn some money will help you get it into areas which are not optimally served. The question then is again corruption and how to control all of this, that the subsidy isn't being eaten up and the patients still pay too much. But there is obviously a value in having a financial incentive in there. And I don't believe we can control distribution chains out of a central agency. Yeah. I was actually very interested also in your view when, so we would probably agree that if you have basic access to essential medicines, that will be huge progress and very many diseases you can treat with this. When we were looking at this with regards to the NCD, the Non-Communicable Disease Summit, we were wondering what our position should be, because we felt very bad as a responsible company to say, okay, we have the innovation for the developed world, for those who can pay, and we have the generics only for the other world. And how do we position ourselves here? Yeah? Because we believe at least some innovation also needs to be in the poorer countries. But then how do we do this in terms of business models? Currently, in essence, in the very poor countries, it's only the elites who have access to these products. And I would be interested in your views. So my internal discussions have been around to say, okay, it's always a question of diffusion of innovation. So there might be different degrees of diffusion, and they should actually go in hand with development of the local infrastructure, because only if you have a cancer center, you can also use some of the high-tech medicine, and that probably we would be prepared to offer more and more innovation at also preferential price, but only if there's a local infrastructure and it's properly being used. But I don't know how this resonates.
Well, I think you raise a problem. I wouldn't raise it differently, because it is not, well, let's put it differently. There are very, very few basic innovation which are life and death innovation, very few. And AIDS, tree therapy is an example, a counter-example, but what happened is many excellent and very efficient drugs now are genericable. And when you know, the example I take to my students is, in France, we increase life expectancy by 3 months per year, okay? So that is 16 million years, okay? We do 800 heart transplants. And this heart transplant improves the life of these 800 people for 10 years maximum. So that is 8,000 years. So, you know, if you don't do heart transplant, you don't see anything. I'm happy to be in a country where we finance heart transplant, but that has absolutely no impact. But on the life of most of the people. So the question you raise are more basic, is how you train nurse practitioner, physician, or people in order for this drug to be distributed, the basic rules of hygiene and so on. So, you know, the problem is that in certain countries, such as Morocco, part of the population has access to the same medical care than we do, 15%. 25 or 30% have access to something, and 50% to nothing. So there's related to the question of and probably we should say a word about that, about the efficiency of the health industry is the political system, but also the education system. You know, we need nurses and doctors in order to do that. And we need to find a way of paying them in the correct way and so on.
I think you're definitely right. I mean, the education part is quite an important part of the efficiency of a health system, and I mean, this goes beyond the industry, obviously. On your point on, I mean, actually, and here you could argue that there should be more regulation around generics and on the quality.
About the use of generics. That, you know, we used to have some international agency before. Speaking of malaria, we could also speak about DDT, because probably it's more efficient to use DDT. You're probably too young to know about what is DDT. You know what is DDT, of course, but everybody knows the controversy about DDT. Well, DDT is, as you know, very efficient, and except that there was a lawsuit from people living in Long Island because they were claiming that DDT was softening the eggs of wild falcons in Long Island. So all the right of environment in America came from this lawsuit. And then DDT was forbidden to be made in America. And so now 500 million people have malaria, 3 million died. And probably the most efficient way to fight malaria is to fight insects, not to cure people. But and you know, and there's this debate about using nets, moustiquaires, en français, in order to
because these are some direct links with.
Yeah, well, it's interesting, and I mean, it's fascinating to say the least about how we often tackle the wrong end of the problem in the attempt to solve it, and it's very difficult to undo it. I'd be keen to hear from some other members of the group, but the question that occupies my mind is how does this play back into a global governance discussion? Like, what needs to change from today, and what could be generated from us here, possibly, that would lead to some momentum in this area that would be different to what we've had. We've had Jean-Michel saying great frustration at the fragmentation on global governance. You, sir, giving us all this detailed information about how we've had things upside down. Petra, you were talking about the notion of a global health citizenship framework that doesn't exist but could. And I just wonder how we play back these multiple issues, which are terribly complex and which we're not equipped to address in detail today. But the bigger question is, when global leaders, you know, my appetite would be, when the G20 meets once a year with the leadership, I don't particularly need it to spend its time talking about the fine details of how to run a financial system worldwide. I think we have many experts on that. What I would love is the G20, for example, as a leadership group, to say, what are our shared goals about health and food, and in a substantial way that leads to work being done. And so I think I'm interested in what's the linkage back to the global governance question of this conference from these issues, because it appears there's a vacuum. It appears there's not a vehicle or a means by which we bring together the international opinion or community to actually shape a view about global governance on health.
You said that you have some I mean, you've clearly put a lot of thoughts on and back on the question of food, because you drew a parallel, which at least
Yes,
I mean,
you're
from
right.
a governance point of view makes some sense. So
You're right.
I would be interested to have some of your thoughts around that. And
Well, I think,
and-
the food security issue is actually a mess. It's not clear, it's not universalised, it's not effectively globally governed. You have expert bodies like the FAO under the United Nations, that's the Food and Agricultural Organisation, does great work, like many of these expert bodies. But the leaders don't even agree what food security is. I mean, for an Australian, for example, food security now and in the future is not about what you can grow within your own borders to sustain your population. Food security is about trading, because food will have to be grown in the future increasingly in some areas and move to other areas where it's consumed. So there's even a definitional problem with food security. So it's not as if we've solved these things at global level, maybe other themes we have. In fact, we're just at the beginning of actually saying, what is the issue there at the global level that needs definition and is possible to shift and find agreement about? Now, I know that President Sarkozy, during the G20 leadership of France, had food security on the agenda, and it tackled some of the issues like the volatility of food pricing. Important. But I think it's important that if you're talking about global governance, that you talk about the high-level issues. And your point, therefore, earlier about life expectancy is something you can measure quite readily and you can agree about and say, do something about that at quite a high level. You don't have to agree at a global governance level about every subset of what you would do. And I think there's something missing in the leadership of our G20 and global governance structures. And it can come from not just governments waking up one day and saying we should do it differently. It can come from people like us who are non-state actors from private sector, because you are committed to competitively succeeding, because this is part of what you do, from civil society. We as a citizenry can actually play a more effective role in saying to governments and G20 and global governance bodies, this is what should be on your agenda, this is what we want you to consider. We will help you put it there and make that decision, and then that will cascade down into institutions and changes and what happens. It doesn't work in food yet. Water is not even considered as a standalone issue, but water is one of the great underpinnings. In my view, it's one that will fuel wars before any of the other security issues like energy. These are out there, and so the point would be, in the case of health, health is not on the agenda, but it's not alone in that we are having trouble about saying what is it we want to consider in the global governance context. If the WHO and the current methods aren't getting us there, what do we need to invent that doesn't exist in order to have the right discussion? Okay?
But it is